If you want to understand how propaganda works, could we get a better case study than this current conflict in Iran? Just watching the media talking about Iran, social media narratives, it is exposing the propaganda machine in action. What a deep, complex, layered, nuanced subject this conflict really is. And I want to dive into this in this episode because I feel that this goes into some of the deepest layers of mind control on an energetic level that is controlling humanity's consciousness beyond the 3D narratives about who is truly to blame for this war, should we be involved in the war, so on and so forth. I want to look more deeply at the Iran Stargate, the energetics held in the land, and then look at what is going on in the broader collective with the sacred rage of the feminine rising, how it connects to this Iran Stargate because women are moving a lot of energy right now. So, we're going to look at this through the lens of mind control, media propaganda, the control of the media and the narratives, as well as through the land energetics, what is occurring on a more esoteric energetic level, and how it connects to the rise of the feminine and the awakening. And we did get into this here on the Heart of Truth podcast. Welcome or welcome back. Several episodes back in January, I did do a fairly deep dive into the conflict that was occurring with, well, what was at the time was just a massacre of the citizens. And since then, things have clearly, evidently escalated, and many are calling it a war. Some are, it's even, contested whether we call this a war or whether it is an operation or a conflict. It's been escalating. The supreme leader, the Ayatollah Khomeini, was taken out. And I kind of touched on this in the last episode that I wanted to get deeper into what's going on because I feel that this is really pointing to some of the roots, the core seeds of the control of humanity. So, again, welcome or welcome back to the Heart of Truth podcast. I'm your host, Amanda, and we're going to dive deep once again into this really, really sensitive subject. This is not an easy subject, it is a heavy subject. But I really want to shed light on things that many people are glossing over and connect it to the depth of what is occurring in the broader collective consciousness awakening that is occurring right now. So there is narrative that is spinning our perception of reality, right? Narrative is what goes down in history. His story written by the victors, aka the patriarchy, in this current paradigm in which we've been living. And women are freaking tired of being blamed and shamed, silenced and suppressed, or cut out entirely of the narrative of history. What happened to her story about what is actually happening through these major global events, how things have been shaped over time, how our entire collective reality and consciousness has been shaped by this narrative, by this editing of history. And this actually goes so deep and it connects very intimately to this specific region. So we're going to get deeper. And I'm going to touch on a lot of subjects that I could probably do a full deep dive episode on unto themselves. There might be spin-off episodes, but we are at a time of the fourth turning, right? We are watching the house of cards fall. Things have been escalating over time energetically, but this is a much grander cycle the way that I see things. I have spoken into this a number of times, but that we are going through an entire collective evolution of consciousness that is more than just a generational shift. But a lot of people are seeing how this does connect to that concept of the fourth turning, a book that was written, I don't know, it was a little while back. And I've seen how people are connecting to the astrology, the events that are happening now, and it does connect. But again, this is very broad and very deep. So we are looking at ancient Mesopotamia and Persian energetics that have been suppressed, that have been excised from our current understanding of the world. There have been overlays placed not just in the last few decades, but for centuries and millennia. So we're going to look at who controls the narrative, what information is being amplified, and the things that aren't really being discussed enough. So I, again, believe that there is a much deeper manipulation of consciousness, truth, and history occurring through the control of this specific region, of this specific land, a form of mind control that enforces compliance with with a corrupt system due to fear of the harsh consequences of stepping out of line. So, as with most authoritarian regimes, the people become their own enforcers, if you will, of the oppressive system to keep their life. They stay in line to keep their life, is how I was trying to say that. And if you toe the line, you risk losing your life. So they become their own self-enforcers. The fathers enforce these strict rules over the women in their life because they fear losing the women. If they walk out of the house and are attacked by the police or stolen by the police and because their hijab wasn't correct, right? So who then becomes the enforcers is the so-called protectors of these women. And then it goes deeper. Sometimes the men who are meant to be the protectors of women, right, have become the abusers. And this is not just in this region. It is not just through Islam. This goes so much deeper. This is a collective consciousness that we are beginning to recognize the very dark, insidious shadows of the masculine that have completely done a 180 from their true divine sacred role of protector of the feminine, and now they have become her biggest threat. Now, this is not feminism that I am talking about. This is not about blaming men. Of course, we all have to take responsibility, but the hijab is a very, very clear example of the distortions at play here. A lot of women have been conditioned to wear it, and they wear it, especially these programmed Western women who have just eaten up the propaganda, and some of them are trans women. Ugh. So women wear it ostensibly so they don't arouse men. It is a protective cover so that they don't arouse men. But this implies that women have to cover up and suppress our natural expression so men don't actually have to face their own shadows, their own inner demons, that they have no self-control, no sense of control over their primal instincts. That's not a woman's problem. That is the responsibility of the man. And yet the full responsibility of the man's behavior has been placed on the woman, blaming the victim, right? Shaming the woman for dressing in a certain way to provoke the men. She's too provocative. It was her fault, right? So we're seeing how this is not just about Iranian society, about Islam. This is a much more pervasive energetic that is being exposed through this region. And we're going to look at how the false masculine overlays have been anchored in this specific region that has perpetuated this consciousness. But before I go any deeper, I would love to hear in the comments, how do you feel that the media has been treating this? What do you think? Do you think the media is deliberately manipulating on all sides, both sides? What do you think is really going on here? I would love to hear in the comments, because I'm not going to, from a more 3D perspective, say this is correct, this is incorrect. I'm going to bring some facts here. But again, I want to anchor this into the broader picture of the deeper layers of energetics, because this is really what I like to get into here. So people are saying that the Iran uprising is a CIA, PSYOP, a Mossad operation, a Western narrative. But the reality is, underlying it, while there could be truth to that, again, it's nuanced, it's layered, it's complex. The reality is Iranian women have been resisting oppression for decades. For the last 47 years, they have been oppressed, suppressed, brutally in most cases, in many cases, having to suppress their expression and facing death in many cases for the simplest things. After the 1979 revolution, they call it a revolution. The freedom was all but stripped from women in a rapid 180 from their pre-revolutionary, relatively Western culture. Women were walking around, walking beautiful streets of Iran, a very Western type society, honestly, like wearing Western clothes, their heads, they didn't have to wear scarves or hijabs. They were able to fully express themselves. They had freedom the way that American women had freedom. So, what led to this revolution and who was behind it is a fair question. The US has often been behind regime change, but is it the US? I mean, I also want to be very clear here. This is another whole spin-off topic that I could get into. We have to get to the point of separating politicians and governments from the people, separating the people of these countries from the politics. We really have to get to this point because so many people, in this case in particular, are focusing solely on the politics and outright ignoring the human rights. Even the human rights activists, the feminists, are most to blame for this. Hands off Iran. Okay, but what about the Iranian women? The hands have been on the Iranian women in a very dark, oppressive, insidious way for half a century, and nobody spoke up then. So this complexity deserves very honest attention right now. And I'm going to tie this in again to the 10D Stargate, but I really do want to look at the narratives that are going around right now. Because what if the media narrative is part of the real war right now? Because we know that this is part of a broader war on consciousness, the spiritual wars. Many of us have been calling it for a while. It's a war on our minds, our hearts, our very souls. And this region has kind of been at the epicenter of it, not just for the last, half century, century. It's been at the epicenter for millennia, in fact, because of a specific energetic with this Stargate, right? So whether you buy into the fact that this is a real Stargate or not, and Stargate can be seen as multiple things. I'm not saying it's necessarily a stone circle in the land kind of thing that is a portal to another realm. But we're going to look at the energetics underlying that. But geopolitical narratives are deeply simplified in this day and age into good versus evil, black versus white, good and bad, right? So this really removes a lot of the historical context, the political complexity, and intelligence operations that might be going on. And who really knows the full truth of what is behind a lot of these military operations, right? I won't get into that whole narrative because that could be a whole other thing. A lot of people talk about the white hats and whatnot, that a lot of what we're seeing is actually just this very specific process that has been orchestrated for the awakening of consciousness. That a lot of this stuff has already been done behind the scenes. The bad players already taken out. And what we're being shown is kind of a drip drop of the truth because a lot of people won't be able to handle the traumatic fallout of seeing all the truth at once. It'll be too much, right? But there is a real layer to the emotional programming beyond the mind control programming. There's an emotional layer to the programming that has resulted from the media narratives, the propaganda machines. Citizens are not truly informed. And then this gets into also Hegelian dialect, the problem, reaction, solution that could be at play here. So there is a lot of outrage right now about wars. We're not meant to get into any more wars. Nobody wants war. Above all, I want peace. I want peace. But I'm not a Pollyanna either. I understand that there is a lot of complexity and nuance to our reality right now. So there's a lot of outrage about the war and the deaths, the tragic deaths I don't want to minimize this whatsoever. The service members that have been killed, the soldiers, I believe seven have lost their lives. And it's tragic. Every death lost to this war consciousness is tragic. Every life lost is what I meant to say. Every death due to it, every life lost due to it. But, people are glossing over the fact that this is not the first time that military have lost their lives, service members have lost their lives for these operations. 13 U.S. service members lost their lives under the withdrawal under Biden. 2,500 lost their lives tragically in the Middle East and Afghanistan and Iraq under Barack Obama, somewhere around there, right? And now we have seven, I believe, that have died under Trump. These are numbers that I kind of verified, but didn't. There could be a little bit off. So take it with a little bit of a grain of salt. But the point here is that sadly, many have lost their lives under the previous administrations that were Democratic. And, a lot of people who voted for Trump voted for him because he said no more wars. Well, that's part of the narrative spin right now is this a full-on war? Is it a conflict? Is it an operation that is going to be quick and that is going to, have benefits? And then of course we look at the school of girls that was shot. I'm still seeing so many people out there blaming that on the American Israeli missiles, blaming it on Trump, where I have seen a lot of confirmation coming even out of Iran itself that it was actually an Iranian missile. And so there's propaganda all around. And then people repeat the propaganda and they feed these lies. They feed the propaganda machine by repeating things without verifying. And it gets very complex because so much truth is hidden, even in the search engines. And then we have the media itself, the bastions of intellectualism, like The Economist and The Atlantic and the New York Times and the Washington Post, some of the most esteemed publications out there, growing up and going to grad school. I really saw like The Atlantic and The Economist as, some of the highest level intellectual publications out there in the New York Times. And now I see how much propaganda is in the headlines. So what can we trust at this point, right? Can we even trust these numbers of deaths, right? One would hope that some things are true, but it is very, very challenging at this point to know. And so this is where discernment comes so high into the conversation. It becomes so important. But there is a truth to the fact that the American military, the American government has been behind a lot of regime change, and it has not really served the countries or the citizens very much in the past, if at all. I think it's only worked out well for a couple countries. I'm not going to get into a whole list. Again, I am not an expert in this, but I did want to bring in some facts here. In 1953, the CIA and British intelligence overthrew Iran's democratically elected prime minister because he suggested that Iranian oil profits should belong to Iranians. They installed a dictator, and then his secret police, who ostensibly were trained by the CIA and Mossad, tortured thousands of Iranian citizens for a quarter of a century. So, there is that layer. So we have to look at the broader context of how everything evolved. But then the Shah was in place, and people thought he was, authoritarian. And then the Ayatollah, the Islamic regime came into play because they promised democracy and then they completely flip-flopped on their promise. And so this is what people have to understand is it's not so black and white. It's not that the Americans are fully to blame. people falsely trusted the Ayatollah in 1979, and then he basically pulled the wool over their eyes and then did a 180. And they're living under the rules for thee and not for me. The top leadership are not forcing their daughters, their wives to wear hijab. But then they're arresting women who don't wear it properly. And in some cases, worse. What happens when they get arrested? Often very brutal things. So these are things that we have to really understand because we have to understand it is complex. And the US has been responsible for a lot of atrocities. That's I'm not trying to gloss that over and deny that truth. And then there's the whole nuclear agenda. I've heard that nuclear Yeah, I've heard some say that nuclear bombs don't even exist. That's an interesting rabbit hole that I actually have not gone into. So that adds a whole other layer of interest and complexity to the conversation as well. I can't verify that. But then we get into the whole Israeli aspect of things. Is this serving Israeli interests? And some people are saying we should have no part of the war because this is simply serving Israeli interests. Well, that denies the fact that the US has very specific interests, which I'll get into in a moment. And it also, again, denies the reality of women in Iran who have been living under this horrific, brutal regime and this horrific oppression for half a century. Women born in the last half a century, people my age, my friends, were born into practical slavery, right? It's a different kind of slavery where they're not in, chains and working the fields, but it's still a form of enslavement when you can't be fully free, when you're scared to walk out the door. Women are scared to walk out the door. They have been for half a century. And where have the feminists and human rights activists been for them until now? And now they're saying hands off Iran. Well, okay, are we just going to turn our backs? So is this about nuclear warheads? Is this about human rights? What if it's about all? And what if actually the lines are very blurred and it's not black or white? What if it's a lot of shades of gray in between? What if it's actually far deeper than this as well? So, some concrete realities about the basic human rights that have been completely squashed by the Iranian regime. I would also like to presence at this point that the Iranians are Persians. A lot of them are Zoroastrians. They are not actually Muslims. They took on the religion by name only on penalty of death if they don't. If they convert to another religion, they could be penalized to death. That's the truth of the reality there. So it's crazy because for a lot of us, like we can't even fathom this level of oppression and the fact that it exists in this day and age. But a girl can be legally married at 13. Mother loses custody when they turn 7. She loses custody of her children. Children of political prisoners are raised within prison walls. Mandatory hijab laws exist, and it's punishable by law up to 15 years, kind of on the whim of the enforcers there. There are morality police who will sit and wait in vans. And I'm getting this from women who actually have shared their stories on social media and were able to leave. But they will sit in vans and watch for women and then sometimes just steal them off the streets and bring them to prison. And then all sorts of horrific things can happen to the women when they're in prison, like rape and things. Legal inequality for women exists at the level of the legal system, the justice system. Women's testimony in court is worth half that of a man. Marital rape is legal. Women can't sing solo in public. They can literally be arrested for that. Women are banned from many sports stadiums. You can be executed for being gay. The irony. Married women need permission from their husbands to travel abroad. there are punishments for protests. And as we saw in January, that punishment includes execution. You can be executed for changing religion as well, convert or die policy through Islam. So, this Islamophobia narrative is kind of insane because, yeah, actually, maybe we should have a phobia of Sharia law and Islam because it's that brutal. Unmarried men and women together, they can be arrested or even worse. Security forces use rape to torture political prisoners, both men and women. Criticizing the regime can get you executed. There's no freedom of speech there. They shut down the internet to hide massacres, as we just saw in January. Men can have four wives and unlimited temporary wives who are temporary wives for hours up to days. What? The IRGC military controls over half the economy like the mafia. The currency lost over 98% of their purchasing power against the dollar. Inflation rate has risen on average 40.3% per year, 442%, I believe, cumulative. So that this is showing the multiple levels of oppression and suppression that have occurred under this regime. Walking your dog is a crime in many cities. The dog can be shot. Children learn in schools to chant "Death to America." Drinking alcohol is illegal and punishable by flogging. Dancing with the opposite sex is illegal. Satellite dishes are illegal. Using Starlink can get you the death penalty. The regime executes thousands of people year on year for whatever reasons, right? Doctors who treat wounded protesters are arrested and threatened with execution. Journalists are imprisoned for reporting truth. So, here are some facts underlying the human rights violations that have been occurring for half a century. And the Western, nations have been allowing this for some reason, for political reasons. Nobody has stepped in. So when are we going to allow human rights to trump political ideology, right? So this is complex because we have people saying that, we should not be pandering to Israeli interests and, getting into war and the nuclear aspect of things. Then there could be legitimate arguments to be made. How much grounded in truth and fact is it? I'm not going to pretend to be an expert on that. But what about these human rights issues that are very real for 90 million people? 45-ish% of which are women. That is like 40 something million women who have been living in fear for half a century. So women in Iran, why don't we listen to them, right? They are celebrating the end of 47 years of suppression, oppression, and depression of not just its people, but the women who have been forced against their will to be silenced and so much more. So these are the issues at hand in our current reality, in our 3D narrative reality. The propaganda exists on multiple sides, to be sure. The Western media weaponizes the feminist narratives and it ignores oppression elsewhere. The alternative media is dismissing this legitimate oppression and calling everything a psyop. That's not helping either. It's creating confusion, it's creating paralysis across the board, it's creating complacency and dissociation. So the black pill community, the truther community, calling everything a psyop and whatnot, that creates bypass in many cases. So where do we draw the line? And when are we going to acknowledge human rights violations that are very, very much at play? When it's only convenient for our narrative, or are we going to allow values to finally overcome ideology? Human values over ideology, please. So, a lot of people are also claiming that this is Israel's war and that the US was dragged into it. But again, death to America. They have been programming children, and I think a lot of the children in that country that was very advanced, probably their parents have been deprogramming that school conditioning. But they have been speaking of fighting great Satan, the United States, and little Satan, Israel, for nearly half a century. So this is an ideology that has been spreading across militant networks. Those militant networks do exist. However, the vast majority of the citizens are not Islam. They're not truly Islamist. They're not truly Muslim. So this is really not an Israeli fantasy. This is actually Iran's own declared doctrine. When you go deep into the militant ideology of Islam, it's very dark. It's very messed up. So, Iran finances militias, it trains terrorist organizations, builds missiles and nuclear capabilities that threaten not just Israel, but other Arab countries, American forces, global stability as a whole. The fingerprints are everywhere. So, when the US is acting against this regime, it's not just acting on behalf of Israel. There are strategic interests at play from my understanding through the lenses that I have been able to peer through. So no, this isn't pure manipulation by Israel. There have been, you know, every single American administration of the 21st century has stated clearly that preventing Iran from obtaining nuclear weapons is a fundamental national security priority as well. So let's not ignore that. It's not just like all of a sudden Israel interest. Has it been Israeli interest all along? Yeah, sure, maybe, but they've been stating this for a while. This isn't just a Trump thing, right? So the debate is not whether Iran is a threat or dangerous. It's been how to stop it. And it's been diplomatic and concessions, and that really doesn't seem to have worked. So Iran is not an isolated regional actor either. So there's geopolitical challenges that extend beyond Iran because Tehran has become a strategic partner of Russia and an economic partner of China, who are also considered to be direct threats to America. So when it comes to the US interests, I'm not saying that this is of the highest timeline, but I'm just saying this narrative that has been spun through many communities that we are acting purely on Israeli interests, that's not really true. That is a narrative in itself. Now, has America been funding both sides of wars and the going even deeper, not just America? Yeah, it does get complex. So there is truth to some of these stances, but it's not necessarily the full truth, is what I'm trying to get at. A lot of these narratives simplify. A lot of these narratives make it black and white when it's really not. So after I finished recording, I had to hop off and jump right onto a session. And after that, I realized there were a couple points that I wanted to bring up, a couple additional layers and nuances and narratives and agendas that I meant to at least mention. And there are probably a bunch more the theories and narratives out there, but these are a couple key ones that I wanted to at least toss into the mix because one of them I feel is a very, very important, poignant one. So before they started launching the attacks, Iran was supposedly exposing the pedophiles, the pedos. Are we allowed to say that out loud? They had published a cartoon of Trump and the devil and the head of the tiny hats. It was like a Lego-esque cartoon. And they were also burning ball statues, kind of like symbolic of we don't agree with this agenda. And, now they're attacking everyone. Some people, of course, are saying this is about the oil, it often is, the resources. But what's really underlying all of these invasions, according to a lot of people, and this is the key point, is that Iran does not have a Rothschild banking system. And there are people out there, there are theories, there's even a book about this, that all wars tie back to the Federal Reserve. All invasions of all countries tie back to the Federal Reserve. There are only a few countries out there that do not have that central banking system that ties back to the Rothschild. So I think that is a very compelling theory myself. The only thing that doesn't quite add up to me is that there are a lot of actual citizens of countries like Venezuela and Iran, of course. I know somebody. And the women there are saying, no, it's bad. This is not propaganda. This is a lived reality that we have experienced. Because some of these same people saying it's all about the banking system are saying life is normal there. And if you haven't been to the country yourself, it is kind of hard to know what is true and what is not. But I would be hard pressed to believe that all of these women taking to social media and sharing their rather horrific experiences or bizarre experiences of visiting the country, even if it wasn't horrific, they felt this energy of anxiety and fear. Are all of them lying about that? Is the whole narrative about hijab and Sharia law a lie? I don't really believe that, honestly. So, how much truth is there to these narratives is a really fascinating aspect that we're being called to collectively examine, I feel. Because I'm not going to say it's not entirely true, like it's not true that there is a banking system aspect to this. We know that they're trying to create a one world order, right? A new world order. And everything will be centralized. You will own nothing and be happy. Happy, right? You have to pretend to be happy, but really you're miserable under that kind of a system. And there is a lot of correlation between communism and Islam when you look at the symbolism, the sickle, right? The sickle and the star, I believe it is. So it gets a little murky and a little complex. Who is really opposed to who, and who is actually truly in cahoots with who? So I don't profess to know the full truth of that, but I do very much believe that there are shadow timelines to a lot of what is going on the global, the global stage. And sometimes these natural disasters, there's a shadow timeline, but I also feel that there is an alchemized timeline of light, that these dark agendas are often hijacked by the light to create a silver lining, such as a clearing and a purge of the land. And there are kamikaze souls that come in and play these very high level roles. That's a term that my friend received. And it's a very intense role to play on this planet, but it's a role that they do choose. So this is getting really zoomed out and high level again. But, bringing it back down to earth, Afghanistan, what was that really about? A lot of people say that was about actually the poppy fields for the opium. So, what's the real agenda? But behind going into these countries, that is a huge question mark. But we know that there is an agenda, especially when the media is all spouting the exact same headline. So apparently, every single news station, every single TV broadcaster is sharing this line: short term pain for the long term gain. This is the current propaganda for this particular agenda. I remember during COVID times how there would be, similar lines, if not almost word for word, the same line repeated on every single network. And it didn't really matter which side they were on necessarily. And I don't know which media stations are using this line, the short-term pain for the long-term gain, but it's really almost comical if it wasn't so insidious what's really going on here. So there we go. We have very clear propaganda going on, and anytime the media is repeating the same line across different networks, you know that there is a deeper agenda at play, that there is a very clear agenda at play. So, this is very much the propaganda machine at play in effect in full force right now. And are they asking us to be complacent? Are they asking us to go along with what's happening because there is a darker agenda at play? They're not really liberating the people. And I don't necessarily believe that Trump has purely benevolent intentions for going in. And at the same time, is that the lighter timeline, the silver lining of the fact that now the world is seeing that these women have been brutally oppressed, that the feminine consciousness has been suppressed, and that there is a very, very deep, insidious mind control agenda going on here. So, I do believe that there's a silver lining to this entire, the collective dark night of the soul, the personal dark night of the soul. There's a lot of silver linings that we can always alchemize the outcome of the shadow of the darkness, right? But that really is incumbent upon how we show up and we face what is in front of us. So it starts within each and every one of us, grappling with our own shadows that we're being confronted with through these global events, but also, collectively, how are we going to come together? Are we going to come together finally, override the divide and conquer agenda, and, stop fighting about which narrative is correct and realize that there is a deeper agenda at play is another part of this. And, are we going to come together and say, okay, we're going to stop maybe paying taxes or something and funding these satanic agendas, right? So, what is that going to look like? That has to actually be up to us, right? Looking back at the American Revolution, well, now I question everything in history, honestly. But, the Boston Tea Party, the taxes were so low. And what are we funding now is these really horrific global agendas. War consciousness is being funded. And, are we fighting for our liberty, or is this money actually contributing to our enslavement? So, this is what we're being called to grapple with on an existential level, I feel. So, I would love to hear in the comments which of these narratives, and there could be more that I haven't heard of or just forgot to mention. But that one I did feel was an important one, the banking system factor. And I realized after the fact I had forgotten to share it. So let me know in the comments below how you think these different agendas or timelines or narratives might come together or converge or, clash. I would be so curious because I really do feel that this is layered in ways that a lot of people are, it's just going over their heads, and that there's a lot more going on beneath the surface, and dark and light potentially, right? So, what's really going on? I would love to hear your thoughts below. And we'll get back into the original stream. So, is the West to blame? Sure, in part, but not purely necessarily. So, getting into the performative feminism versus true feminine liberation, I want to get into this level because this is a huge part of what we're seeing is the, white liberal feminists are just purely performative in their stances. Shouldn't the liberation of the women of Iran be like top of their agenda? Unfortunately, it doesn't fit their narrative of Islamophobia bad, Palestine good. And, nothing against the Palestinians here, but, if we now support the liberation of the Iranian woman from Islamic oppression and suppression, it kind of throws a wrench into that whole Palestine narrative. And then we have the Islamophobia narratives being pushed by the Elon Omars of the world. It's like, okay, why don't you go to Iran? Go live there if you love it so much. If you love Islam so much, like go live there. I guarantee that they won't, right? So their feminism is corporate slogan. It's hashtag activism. And yeah, it's like celebrities, take up a cause probably because they're paid by somebody, honestly. Uh, they're paid a lot of the time to push a narrative, especially when they bring it to social media. That's not usually of their own accord. So one of the most interesting propaganda narratives of the past decade has been this performative feminism. The I'm thinking of Hillary and her pantsuit nation, which I had joined this group on Facebook years ago, and I was like, huh. And now I just see how dark and distorted so much of that is. So we have corporate feminism, social media activism, virtue signaling is underlying so much of it, especially now on social media. It's not real. And it's being used to justify geopolitical narratives. But real feminine resistance is the Iranian women themselves removing their hijabs. They have deep courage, this deep, potent life force energy of the feminine is rising through Iranian women right now. They are genuinely risking imprisonment and death. American liberal protesters are like a joke in my mind. And if that sounds judgmental, it is. I think we need to bring judgment back, honestly, to call people up and out, face the mirror finally. It's not real. Real courage is actually standing in the face of legitimate threat and legitimate violence and speaking truth anyway, standing up for your right anyway, holding a boundary in the face of violence anyway, because it's the right thing to do. So, what is really underlying this as well is the false masculine systems are collapsing. There are corrupted masculine structures upholding not just Islam, but this entire system of patriarchy, this inverted paradigm that we've been living in. So, the problem isn't men. I want to be very, very clear because men have been victims of this corrupt system as well, these false systems. The corrupted masculine power structures are to blame. And this is what is underlying the feminine suppression, as well as the degradation of the sacred masculine. So, political power systems, corporate control, ideological institutions like Islam and all the patriarchal religions. This is what is creating the tentacles of control throughout our world. This is the shadow masculine archetype at play. The healthy masculine, again, is all about protection, structure, order. They're the builders, right? They're meant to build the thing, the structure, the support, create the safety, create the system and structure to allow the feminine energy to flourish. The false masculine, however, is about domination, control, suppression of life force, specifically, especially that of the feminine. So, Iran's regime represents the shadow extreme of this distortion. And it's no accident because it lies on the 10D Stargate. This is the false Michael construct anchored in at this place. So this is where patriarchal dominance is enforced. The false Michael construct is anchored in this region, and it's creating this alien predator mind, false king of tyranny energy that is seeping through the grids into the collective consciousness across the world, not just in this region. However, this region, it has been amplified and deliberately used to manipulate the consciousness of the masculines in particular, but humanity as a whole. So there's this warring control and militarization over this Stargate, which is why there has been so much conflict in this region, because it's both Iran and Iraq where the Stargate lies. So it targets males to be militaristic in their energy, in their mentality. So the energetic layer that is going on here is also the feminine voice rising as the control structures around this Stargate begin to collapse. I'm just going to take a sip of water here. So, this region is that of ancient Mesopotamia. And I believe I said this in the previous episode, but I have always felt a really deep connection with this region. My eighth grade uh, history, we looked at these ancient cultures and civilizations, the Fertile Crescent, the breadbasket of the world, ancient Mesopotamia, Babylon, Persia. And so I actually loved that history more than any other history. And I have felt some visceral connection, not a strong draw to travel necessarily at this point in time because it's been so heavily suppressed and it's not so safe for women. But I loved Turkey when I visited. I did get to travel to Turkey. And Cappadocia, not just Istanbul. So I was able to see the Islamic overlays, but also the ancient energies underlying the region. So this ancient Mesopotamian region, the land is just so rich and deep. It's old in a way that, words can't fully capture. We can feel that when we really tune into it. So this goes deeper than the surface of the earth, of course. It gets into the grids, into the stargates, into the portals. Moving through the collective consciousness, this energy is stirring in the energetic grid of Gaia herself. And so there is this powerful gateway in the planetary grid, this stargate. Ley lines move out from these stargates. They carry the energy. So we are feeling this feminine power being reactivated. So true feminine power is not outrage, but sacred rage is rising in the fields of so many women right now. And I believe it is directly connected to what is going on in Iran as it connects to this Stargate. We are seeing through the illusions, and this is discernment at play. We're not activating outrage when we are truly embodied. We allow this energy to move through our systems. We hold our boundaries firm, and we might speak firmly. We might speak with a sword of truth, but that does not mean we're being reactive. It means that we are picking up on distortion and holding a line, holding a boundary that has been crossed way too many times through our lineages, through the ancestral line, through past lives, through millennia. The women have been just completely, their boundaries have been completely trampled on. So now we are feeling the rage and the grief of our ancestors of past lives where we were oppressed, suppressed, and so much worse. So the throat chakra is intimately connected to this region, as the 5D and the 10D are connected. But truth speaking, the feminine voice, this is what is rising as our power rises because this is also intimately connected to the womb. And as the womb heals, the throat activates. The two are intimately linked. So this is, again, connected to the 10D Stargate activation. There has been a long-standing control structure that has severed humanity from its wholeness, its own divine nature, rooted and anchored in this region, especially this region that was the original Eden when it existed, I believe. But it has separated us from the feminine principle within creation, the 10D carrying a lot of this Sophianic coding that resides within the earth itself too. But this balance between the masculine and the feminine that exists at the heart of source has been severed and distorted here. This also gets into the destruction of Tiamat. This has been coming up a fair amount lately. Tiamat was the ancient living goddess of this 10th gate, according to certain perspectives. And she was exploded into bits. And these bits were used to create reversals, creating womb reversals. But essentially, This was the destruction of the heaven and earth template in harmony. This is also the destruction of the sacred marriage template. This split created patriarchal domination and misogyny. This is how it was anchored in with the rise of the patriarchy. It was through the fall of this Stargate. So symbolically, the suppression of the women's voice is also the suppression of truth because harmony has completely been removed from the equation. But when the feminine rises, truth cannot be silenced any longer. And this collapses false timelines. People are forced to see through the illusion. Narratives begin breaking down. And this is why everything is feeling so chaotic right now, I believe. Underneath this sacred rage, though, as I was beginning to say, is the grief that radiated from the feminine. Ooh, my little my little light went out. So it was not this is not just personal grief. It's the sorrow of generations of women that have been silenced, hidden, controlled, erased. Erased in the most literal sense, not just written out of history, but erased from reality. The rage against the masculine is for not protecting us from this system. It's for not protecting us from themselves. It's a rage against the system itself and the complacency or participation of the masculine in this system, rather than defending and protecting the feminine. But then we see how the masculine, there has been deep mind control. So we also get to have compassion for the masculine, but the masculine has to step up. The women, we cannot play victim. I want to be very clear about that. This is not about blaming and shaming one gender or the other. We all have to take responsibility for the work that needs to be done to reconcile the energetics that have been at play, to clear from our field anywhere we're available from mind control. We have to feel it, recognize it, acknowledge it, and then allow it to pass through us rather than letting it get stuck and then perpetuating these systems. And if we don't acknowledge the role that we all play, if we keep blaming and shaming the women for playing victims, as you know, if the men keep doing this and not taking responsibility for their own shadows that have allowed the system to perpetuate, that's not going to help either. So this broader awakening pattern connects to Epstein, the guru collapse in the spiritual community, this top-down hierarchy dominance type energy at play through it all. Media manipulation, truth suppression, propaganda. All of these are exposing the corrupted power structures of this inverted matrix that has hijacked the truth of the feminine and created an absolute inversion of the organic reality. So the real war here is not just geopolitical. It's a war for perception, for consciousness, for truth, for the minds, hearts, and souls of humanity. And the real power people must develop now is discernment, is intuition, is taking their power back from these systems of control, taking personal responsibility at a baseline, but allowing ourselves to develop these internal powers that are deeply feminine. The feminine is that intuition energy, but we all contain it. We all have this capacity. And then placing the feminine back on her throne of honoring that power. Right? There is potent power in her softness, in her purity, and her receptivity. That is how we allow intuition to move through us, is by becoming receptive to the guidance. So the sovereign feminine is holding a current of ancient wisdom. The Sophia is this sovereign feminine. She is the living intelligence of the divine feminine that is deeply connected to this 10D stargate. She is the aspect of creation that remembers wholeness, that holds the wisdom of life itself, that cannot be extinguished, no matter how much it has been suppressed. Her light will never fully go out. The awakened feminine cannot be controlled, and that is precisely why they have tried to suppress and control her so much. She cannot be controlled for all of eternity. They know their time is running out, and so yes, they are getting a little bit desperate. as they should. But along with this reclamation and restoration of the feminine is the connection with the earth that is being restored in kind, as well as to intuition and wisdom of the body temple. We're all being called to really embrace this feminine wisdom that is deeply embodied. It's held within the body. I talk a lot about the body temple. Mind and body have to be connected out of the head into the heart, out of the head into the body temple, into the body wisdom. And so, this is what I was talking about with the 0 point threshold higher self embodiment portals. What does the actual structure of that look like? But what does that mean also on a practical level of the nervous system? And so that is available as a replay. So if you want to access that, it's just $22. But yeah, full of potent codes, and I got beautiful feedback from that. But what is happening right now is this very deep and primal reclamation and restoration of the true feminine coding. There are a lot of puzzle pieces that have been coming into my own personal reality as I have gone through my own initiations. I brought through the 13 keys and then I shared them, and that brought me through a whole other level of initiation. And I'm beginning to see this wider web, the puzzle pieces coming together and beginning to make sense in a way that is actually deeply redemptive for both the feminine and the masculine. And so I'm still working on these energetics and how this all weaves together. I have been unraveling the dark webs and seeing in the field the web being spun by the grandmother, the true grandmother spider of creation, as a contrast. This is just kind of a good symbolic representation. It's like that black widow energy that has been entrapping souls and bodies. We can see them held in cocoons, literally trapped like flies in the web. That's being unraveled right now. That dark feminine consciousness, that dark mother archetype that is behind a lot of this masculine mind control energy, this masculine oppression and suppression, it goes so deep. And it's actually a little bit of a tangled web, because what caused the creation of the dark mother in the first place? How does that connect to the destruction of Tiamat, right? And what I have been experiencing, though, things that have been coming into my field, is this desire for redemption for even the most fallen. I'll leave it at that for now. But what we are all being called to do is to ask for redemption and to walk that path of reclamation and restoration with deep reverence for the divinity in all of creation, including ourselves, to restore our connection with Holy Mother, Holy Father God, and to allow ourselves to keep walking the path of truth, of justice. What does justice look like? What is truth? We feel that within our bodies. When we become whole, we recognize holiness. And so this is what we're being called to do, to remember, to put the pieces back together. There's the story of Osiris's body parts being scattered, but the original story is of the feminine being exploded into bits. So is that in itself an inversion? Seeing the solar masculine needing to be put together by the feminine, or is it the masculine that actually needs to help put the feminine back together? The feminine, the women of the world, have been holding this in our nervous systems. And this is why so many women are exhausted. This is why so many women are drained. This is why so many women are angry and expressing outrage, because they don't have the conscious awareness to understand what they're holding and they're carrying. And they are acting in reactivity and projecting it through outrage onto the masculines. And there are masculines out there that have been deeply abusive of the feminine, but how much of that is possession? How much of that is mind control? and the men need help too. So we need to stop getting into, it's like this chicken or egg at a certain point. Who is the original sinner? I think we need to stop with this narrative because it has all been placed on the woman, the shame and the blame for the ills of humanity. And this is not serving her by saying you have to take responsibility alone for your outrage and your victimhood. That doesn't help either because she's been carrying this on her own. So the masculines have to step up. The feminine has to understand that she does have to take responsibility for her own healing. But we have to recognize that we are in this together. This is really the core of healing separation consciousness is yes, reuniting the pieces of ourselves back into wholeness, into holiness, but recognizing also the divinity in the other, even the most fallen. Do they deserve forgiveness? Are they worthy of redemption? I am feeling more and more, yes, even the darkest amongst us. However, some souls have to go through the whole process of rehabilitation. In my sessions, I send the energies back to source, but I've had some very interesting energies coming into my field of late that have been really causing me to or prompting me, asking me, almost outright asking me to really see the deeper energetics and underpinnings and how the puzzle pieces fit together. And to stop, not that I am necessarily in victimhood with all of this myself, but so many of us have this subtle layering and conditioning and programming. And we're like, a lot of us are dealing with energies that it's like we're being called to hold our boundaries because they're projecting reactivity onto us, not recognizing that they're acting out of integrity themselves. This is both men and women. I hope what I'm saying is clear now because I feel that I'm bringing a lot of pieces of the puzzle together in a kind of web that is being woven through my words right now and not necessarily a bad one. Oh, but this is what I was starting to say. I'm seeing these silk threads that are luminescent, opalescent, iridescent, weaving a more beautiful timeline, weaving the threads of consciousness into a higher expression. So it's being transmuted from that dark black widow into the grandmother weaver of creation that is full of the web that is full of diamonds, the diamond web of consciousness. That's actually something that I like a title in my book, like a subtitle or a chapter or something. The diamond web of consciousness in the grid, and then these silk threads. Like silk is a very beautiful material, right? These silk threads that are rainbow like, iridescent, luminescent, and really beautiful. So that is the kind of transformation that we are being called to integrate as we allow these energies to process through our own systems, to alchemize them into the purest expression of God's source light is how it's coming through right now. So, remembering that the feminine dissolves systems of dominance, separation, force, and fear, and ultimately restores balance to the masculine. The two are not in opposition. We never truly were. That is a false overlay of separation consciousness, as I was beginning to say. So, bringing this home to the heart of truth. We're being really called to go within, as within, so without, right? And to reconcile within ourselves, to reflect within ourselves. Is the exposure of these systems happening randomly, or are we witnessing a greater global awakening where truth can no longer be hidden? And what role are we playing in that now? Where are we suppressing truth of shadows we might still be holding within? Where are we not allowing that truth to be illuminated, those shadows to be illuminated? Where are we still in reactivity? Where are we still projecting onto others? Where are we still operating out of integrity? So I will end this here. here, where we are, home in the heart. This is where we're being called to return home to. So thank you so much for being here on this journey with me. This is a complex subject. This is a deep dive. I probably could have spoken for a lot longer about some of these subjects, gone into many other tangents and rabbit holes. But I invite us all to really go deep within and reflect. And if you do want to go deeper, again, I have my 0 Point Threshold Higher Self Embodiment is a beautiful place to begin. I have my free Divine Feminine Sovereignty Reclamation Masterclass. I am open for one-on-ones, including crystalline womb restoration and multidimensional karmic liberation, which is open to all. And my book. It's available on audiobook. I highly recommend this. This is a foundation of the whole journey of healing and awakening. It's not the be all end all of every complex layer that we're getting into, but this is the foundation that we're being called to integrate, like the foundation of the body temple above all. But understanding also the web, the greater webs of the collective consciousness and the shadows and the process that we're undergoing right now. I stand by my book wholeheartedly, and I love it. I'm very proud of myself for that. And is there anything else I'm feeling called to share before I wrap this up? Overflow is a really beautiful place to begin, as well as Defense Against the Dark Arts. So if you have any questions about my offers and what is available, there's also the Inner Temple, and we have the upcoming equinox celebration, of course. So yes, that's all available on my website. I will have all the links below, but I am sending you all so much love as we journey home to the heart of truth, onward and upward in love and light. I said that backwards today. How interesting. So thank you for being here with me. Oh, and the like, subscribes, comments are so appreciated. And yes, I love the discussions in the comment section. So thank you. Thank you for engaging. Thank you for joining me on this journey. Onward and upward in love and light as we journey home to the heart of truth. And I will see you in the next episode. Thank you for tuning in to the Heart of Truth podcast with your host, Amanda Erin Kelly. If you enjoyed this episode, please consider leaving a rating or review on your favorite platform. And if you'd like to go deeper, grab your copy of my book, Let There Be Light, and join us inside the free community in Illumina Wisdom School, where you can access free resources to jumpstart your journey, such as a higher self activation and the Body Temple Blueprint Masterclass, as well as explore the plethora of resources, including Awakening Fundamentals and Luminary, my signature path to wholeness and mastery, to help you become your own healer and sovereign authority. You can access everything at thisartcalledlife.com or find the links down in the show notes below. Until next time, onward and upward in love and light as we journey home to the heart of truth.